Moving on, but staying on the same subject, Bitcoin in the headlines right now. So we wanted to bring in Geoff Kendrick, who is head of digital assets research at Standard Chartered, who has been covering the cryptocurrency story for years. And Geoff, it's great to have you back with us. Thanks so much for your time. First of all, for those who are trying to figure out the story of Bitcoin making these all-time highs, I heard some people saying it's because there's enthusiasm around perhaps more legislation in Washington. What would you say? What do you think has been the latest driver for Bitcoin?
Thanks, John. So there's two things that matter at the moment. So at the moment, there's been this pressure on Fed Chair Powell coming from the Trump administration. And Bitcoin itself is a hedge against issues in the traditional financial sector. So they could be either private banks having trouble, like in March 2023, SVB and a couple other banks going down, or at the moment, there's risks around the Fed independence that prices in risks on treasuries in a related fashion. And Bitcoin essentially hedges against those risks. So that's the, let's say, new news. And then on the other side, the inflows, quite frankly, to the ETFs and also the Bitcoin treasury companies like MicroStrategy, of which there are now a number of imitators, have been humongous. So in Q2 alone, that accounted for 245,000 Bitcoins being removed from the market, quite frankly, never to be sold again. And that's more than 1% every quarter of all Bitcoins that will ever exist. Yeah, so you've got this huge inflow story, which is swamping anything else. These are the largest inflows on the ETF side in particular of any asset class's ETF in its first 18 months. So no great surprise, the prices are pushing higher on the back of that. And it's getting that extra leg, if you like, every time President Trump talks about getting rid of the Fed Chair Powell.
Interesting. Okay, so a couple of big themes there. I guess in terms of corporate treasuries adopting Bitcoin, how much has the MicroStrategy story itself influenced, do you think, other companies choosing to do the same thing?
Obviously, MicroStrategy has been a huge success story over the last few years. In 2024, my understanding is MicroStrategy stock was the best performing of any stock globally, certainly of a certain size. And this year, because of that, you've now seen a lot of new startups in that space. I count about 65 corporates globally that really have no other business being in Bitcoin outside of adding Bitcoin to their treasury holdings. And quite frankly, they're now accounting for a larger share of that Bitcoin buying even than MicroStrategy themselves. Of course, their average break-even prices are high because they started later. So I put MicroStrategy around 70,000 in terms of its average purchase price. For the imitators, it's around about 90,000. So obviously, we're well in positive profit territory at the moment, above 120,000. So no great stresses. It's more the flow story that keeps dominating. And these imitators, I would say, will keep buying Bitcoin, and there'll probably be a lot more of them as a result.
Well, on that subject of flows, I mean, the ETF Bitcoin boom is something, when I've spoken to you in the past, you've cited as one of the continuing catalysts, in your opinion, that could fuel the price of Bitcoin. Can you just give us an update on what your current expectations are for Bitcoin performance going forward?
Absolutely. So you're right on the flow side. I expect flows in ETFs and Bitcoin treasuries to be more than 1% of all Bitcoins that will ever exist every quarter. By the end of this quarter, I'm forecasting 135K. Perhaps that number is going to end up being too low given what we've seen over the last week or so. And then by the end of this year, 200,000 is the number for me. At the end of this quarter, there could be some chat around the halving cycle. In past cycles, when you got about 18 months past the halving, that had been the peak price. That coincides with back end of September or early October this year, when you've married it up against what happened in previous cycles. And I suspect that will be another opportunity to be buy Bitcoin then if there was any price reduction around some of those fears, because I think those ETF and Bitcoin treasury flows will swamp those fears. And once the market realizes that, we can accelerate to that 200K price by the end of December.
You know, it's interesting, Geoff, you've have never shied away from making forecasts for the cryptocurrency. And That's one of the unique things about the research you're doing, which is always backed by a lot of the specifics on what's happening in the industry. When people ask you, what am I missing? Like, if crypto is going to continue to gain, what would you say has been the most commonly asked question from people who aren't quite sure of this crypto rally, maybe don't believe in the story of Bitcoin, and just the idea of the asset rising in value because there's been demand for it? So what generally would you say would be the other side of this for people to just consider when they're looking at cryptocurrencies, or specifically Bitcoin?
Absolutely. So the other thing that's helping Bitcoin at the moment is actually the stablecoin revolution. Now, stablecoins are digital assets backed by blockchain in exactly the same fashion as Bitcoin is, but they're pegged to the US dollar. That market cap at the moment is about 240 billion. So relatively small, but it has been growing. I published a note suggesting that that gets to $2 trillion by the end of 2028. And this week, it's very likely that the critical act, which is called the Genius Act in the US, will pass, and that will unleash more, let's say, real world uses for digital assets. And specifically, what I mean is that at the moment, when you send money from either individual to individual or particularly cross borders, it takes a lot of time, like days to get there. Stablecoins can allow assets to be transferred instantaneously, globally, 24/7. And so that real world use case is finally coming to the asset class as well, and then legitimizing other assets like Bitcoin and others on the back of that. Yeah. So finally, digital assets are starting to do something in the real world, which is typically what we see with technology over time. It starts to replace real world uses. So this is a replacement of typical and historical payments rails, which is just getting going, but over time, in my opinion, explodes. And that legitimizes some of those more volatile assets like Bitcoin.
All right, and sort of a final question on the volatility, because I think this has been a very interesting year because there's also been so much interest in gold as well. And I think in light of, uncertainty around the world and people seeking safe haven assets, or even having these broader fears around inflation or, ongoing fiscal challenges in the United States, looking at how something like Bitcoin performs on those measures was also of interest to a lot of people. We happen to be in a bull market where a lot of tech stocks have been rallying as well. Do you think that Bitcoin still ultimately trades in the short term more like a tech stock? So if the same people were asking questions about whether the all-time highs for stocks, whether things were to turn over a little bit, that is the kind of thing that could lead to some volatility to Bitcoin in the other direction? What are you going to be watching in the interim between sort of where we are today and what your longer term targets are?
Absolutely. So Bitcoin does trade like tech stocks when there's no other news. So at the moment, it's outperforming tech stocks because of that Powell Trump story that I mentioned a moment ago, and because of those ETF inflows. But when there's not much news, which does happen sometimes, although that seems to be very infrequent at the moment, Bitcoin does trade like a tech stock. And I've had a look. If you replaced one of the Mag 7 stocks with Bitcoin over the last 7 years, you would have not only had better returns, but also lower volatility on a portfolio adjusted basis. So actually Bitcoin can add to long tech stock portfolios. And on the volatility side, right where we are right today, think about Bitcoin compared to NVIDIA. Bitcoin is roughly the same size as NVIDIA at the moment. Obviously, NVIDIA is AI. Bitcoin is blockchain backed. In terms of volatility, though, Bitcoin's vol is now lower, and it's been coming lower through the year this year. So again, on a portfolio basis, at the start of this year, I thought we could get to 200K by the end of this year as portfolios adjusted, but volatility of Bitcoin is now even lower. So structurally, global investors are even shorter or underweight Bitcoin than they were at the start of the year. So that can push on to even higher levels, I suspect, in 26.